There are courtroom moments you forget the minute they're over, and then there are the ones that burn into history like they were scripted by Shonda Rhimes herself. And the day Jennifer Sullivan stormed into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, that was one for the books. She didn't just walk in with unpaid parking tickets. She walked in carrying a political last name, a mountain of entitlement, and the kind of smug confidence only someone deeply
If
out
you
of
enjoyed
touch
this
with
breakdown,
reality can
don't
truly
forget to
master.
like,
Her
subscribe, and
mistake
drop a
wasn't
comment.
just thinking she
Your
was above the
feedback helps
law,
shape what
it
we
was
cover
thinking she
next,
could weaponize
and
her
you being
husband's
here keeps
position
the
against the
conversation
law
going.
itself.
Thanks for watching.
Let's rewind this
See you in the
masterpiece of
next one.
self-destruction. Jennifer Sullivan, wife of State Senator Michael Sullivan, chair of the Judiciary Committee, translation, her husband had power, influence, access, and somewhere along the line Jennifer decided that also made her untouchable. She had racked up a casual collection of parking tickets, some say over a dozen, nothing life-threatening, but instead of paying them like everyone else, she ignored them, over and over. Letters went unopened, fines doubled, warnings escalated. So she was summoned to court. Now, for normal people, this would be the cue to throw on something respectful, maybe show a little humility and hope the judge takes it easy. But not Jennifer. She marched in like she was there to inspect the place, as if the court existed to serve her, as if Judge Caprio, beloved across the internet for his compassion and fairness, was some low-level clerk who should be grateful to be in her presence. Caprio begins reading her charges, standard stuff, polite tone. He doesn't know yet that the next few minutes are about to go viral, but then, out of nowhere, Jennifer interrupts him, not to explain, not to apologize, but to warn him. Her words, "This shouldn't have made it this far, my husband chairs the judiciary." And just like that, the room changed. She said it with such cold certainty, like a mob boss reminding you who controls the docks. You could almost hear the unspoken, "So watch your next move, Judge." Caprio didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, dead calm, and asked her to clarify. And then she dropped the line that sealed her fate. "If you don't handle this, there are people who fund this courtroom who will." She didn't just threaten a judge, she threatened.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
The independence of the judiciary on camera with a condescending smile and the posture of someone who's gotten her way her entire life. That's when Caprio, cool as granite, said the words that lit the internet on fire. "Ma'am, you've mistaken this courtroom for something it's not. This isn't a political chamber. This is where justice is served." And with that, he began dissecting her record piece by piece, every ticket, every warning, every time she'd parked in restricted zones and ignored consequences. It was a clinical takedown, calm, detailed, surgical. The final blow, Caprio held her in contempt of court live. And the moment that gavel hit the bench, you could feel a million viewers cheering from their couches, their cars, their phones. Justice had not only been served, it had been live-streamed in 1080p. Within hours, the clip had gone viral. News outlets picked it up. Social media erupted. People couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. A sitting senator's wife threatening a judge in open court like it was nothing and getting publicly dragged for it. It was the kind of moment that cuts through noise because it wasn't about political parties or policy debates. It was about power, unchecked and weaponized, crashing headfirst into someone who refused to be intimidated. But that was only the beginning. Because once the public saw the clip, the floodgates opened. Whistleblowers came forward. Employees from city departments admitted they'd received angry emails from Jennifer demanding tickets be dismissed. One parking official revealed that she'd called him irrelevant to his face. Another said she'd threatened to make some calls if a tow truck wasn't reversed immediately. And that's when the investigation into her husband kicked off. Turns out Senator Sullivan wasn't just a silent bystander. He had personally reached out to city officials to discuss Jennifer's fines. Emails surfaced, phone logs, the dots connected. A Judiciary Committee chair trying to quietly pressure local government to make his wife's problems disappear, that's more than sketchy, that's abuse of power. Within days, the Senate Ethics Board launched a formal review. Public pressure mounted. Local newspapers ran front-page editorials. Protesters started showing up outside the State House with cardboard gavels and signs reading, "No one is above the law." The Sullivans tried to spin it, issued a weak joint statement about misunderstandings and unfair media portrayal, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the receipts were already printed.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
By the end of the month, Senator Sullivan had stepped down for the good of the public. A resignation that wasn't noble, it was necessary, because once the people saw behind the curtain, there was no unseeing it. Jennifer, meanwhile, was sentenced not just to pay her fines but to perform community service, assigned in a masterstroke of poetic justice to the Parking Enforcement Department. She went from threatening city workers to being one, "You can't make this stuff up." The story didn't just end their careers, it became a symbol. Law schools across the country started using the footage in classes on judicial ethics and abuse of influence. Think pieces were written, podcasts dissected every line, and Judge Caprio, he didn't say much, he didn't have to, his silence said everything. He became an icon not because he shouted or demanded headlines but because he didn't budge. He showed what happens when a public servant remembers who they actually serve, the public, not politicians, not spouses of politicians, the people. What made this so satisfying wasn't just that justice was done, it's that it was done in the light. No backroom deals, no quiet dismissals, just a judge, a courtroom, and a camera that happened to be rolling. Jennifer walked in thinking her name was a shield. She walked out a national cautionary tale. And maybe that's the most poetic part of all. The woman who tried to silence the law by flexing her political ties is now forever remembered for proving that no amount of privilege can protect you from the truth. She thought she was making a power move. What she really made, a lesson. So the next time someone drops a name, throws their weight around, or thinks they're untouchable because of who they married, remember this moment. Remember that courtroom. Remember that gavel. If this saga had you hooked, fired up, or quietly fist-pumping, make sure you hit that like button, share the story with someone who lives for justice, and subscribe for more chaotic courtroom dramas, political faceplants, and satisfying public reckonings. And let's hear it in the comments. Was this the most public cell phone of the year, or does someone else deserve the crown? Either way, one thing for sure, you don't mess with Judge Caprio, and you definitely don't try to cheat the system when the system is watching back. Because the courtroom never lies, that's what made this whole saga hit differently. It wasn't just a political scandal, it was a slow-motion implosion that unraveled live in front of an audience that seen too many powerful people squirm their way out of trouble. But this time, there was no escape hatch, no private resolution, no political favors swept under the rug at midnight. Just cameras, facts, a judge who didn't flinch, and a woman who thought her last name made her bulletproof. Jennifer Sullivan didn't just underestimate Judge Frank Caprio, she underestimated the weight of her own audacity. She walked into that courtroom convinced she was holding the winning hand and didn't realize until it was too late that she'd been bluffing, with the whole country watching. In that moment, it stuck. It stuck with the clerk in the back who's watched years of political families throw around entitlement like a credit card. It stuck with viewers across the country who are so tired of watching the rich and connected slide by on loopholes. It even stuck with politicians, yes, even them, who suddenly realize there are limits, that if you get too comfortable in your seat of power, the fall is a lot.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Deeper when it finally happens. The Sullivan debacle became more than a scandal. It became a blueprint for what not to do with privilege. Because Jennifer didn't just demand special treatment, she demanded it loudly, publicly, like she believed her influence gave her a permanent backstage pass to the legal system. She wielded her husband's role like a threat, and she expected the people in the room to be afraid. But Judge Caprio, he didn't blink. In that moment, when he leaned forward, looked her dead in the eye, and reminded her that her husband's job had nothing to do with the law, that's when the internet lost its collective mind. Not out of shock, but because it felt like someone had finally drawn a line and meant it. Here's the irony though. Jennifer could have walked in, paid the tickets, said a few words about misunderstanding the process, and walked right back out. This could have been a non-story, a shrug, a forgotten name on a docket, but her own entitlement turned a simple court date into a cautionary tale burned into Rhode Island's history. And the aftermath wasn't quiet either. Let's not forget, this didn't just take out Jennifer, it exposed a network. After her courtroom moment detonated online, people started digging. Reporters combed through public records, staffers whispered to journalists, emails were leaked. Municipal workers, once afraid to speak up, realized the climate had changed. And oh, did they speak? Turns out, Jennifer had been name-dropping her way through the city for years, refusing citations, calling supervisors, demanding apologies from meter maids. At one point, she allegedly told a towing company manager that this whole operation could be shut down with a single call. Spoiler, that call never came. All of this triggered a statewide ethics audit. A real one, not just for the Sullivans but for other high-ranking officials. Because once the public saw what happened, they started asking questions about who else might be abusing their access. Who else was walking around town with invisible immunity just because they sat next to someone powerful at dinner. And Senator Sullivan, let's talk about him. He tried to downplay it at first, played the loyal husband card, said his wife was being unfairly targeted by a media frenzy. But then the receipts dropped. His name on emails, in calls, attempting to clarify expectations with city departments. It wasn't just messy, it was blatant. And when he realized his position on the Judiciary Committee was now a liability instead of a flex, he folded. Quick. He resigned quietly, hoping to dodge the public fallout. But you can't unring the bell, and you definitely can't erase video evidence with a resignation letter. His political career evaporated faster than a spin room at a press conference, and the whispers about a possible future run for governor, gone. Vapor. Because no one wants to vote for the guy whose wife got held in contempt by a judge half the internet considers a national treasure. And speaking of Caprio, let's talk about how he handled all of this. Because he didn't change, he didn't post victory videos or go on a press tour, he didn't capitalize on the virality. He just kept showing up, listening to people, handing out justice with that same steady grace he's had for decades. That's why this hit so hard. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice, he didn't insult Jennifer, he didn't throw her husband under the bus. He just calmly applied the rules, the same rules he applies to everyone else. And in doing that, he showed us exactly what it looks like when the system actually works.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
He made a point that didn't need shouting. The law doesn't care who you are, it cares what you did. And if we're being honest, that moment restored a little faith. In a time when so many people feel like the game is rigged, this was a rare flash of accountability, of fairness, of someone saying no to power and having the backbone to mean it. And yeah, it was dramatic, it was scandalous, it was messy. But it was also important. Because if Jennifer Sullivan had gotten away with it, if she'd walked out of that courtroom with her record wiped and her smirk intact, it would have sent a message. That intimidation works, that political privilege is still bulletproof, that the rest of us are just background noise. But that's not what happened. Instead, she became the face of what happens when arrogance meets consequence. A woman so convinced the rules didn't apply to her, she basically handed the court its own viral takedown moment. And the best part, she did it to herself. So next time someone asks if the system ever really holds powerful people accountable, just send them the clip. Let them watch that moment when a woman tried to threaten her way out of responsibility and got met with a silent, unimpressed stare and a gavel. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a calm judge, a quiet courtroom, and the crushing sound of entitlement collapsing under its own weight. But even after all that, after the meltdown, the resignation, the public disgrace, you know what the wildest part is. Jennifer Sullivan still didn't seem to get it. Because instead of disappearing into private life with a little humility and a whole lot of self-reflection, there were murmurs she was working on a memoir. Yes, a memoir, about being publicly misunderstood. the usual redemption arc. Except this one wasn't going to be about courage or growth or even regret. No, this was going to be her side of the courtroom catastrophe. Spoiler alert, we already watched her side, unedited in 4K. But the delusion still strong. Because in her mind, she was the victim of media sensationalism, of a judge who performed for the cameras, of a public that didn't know the whole story. As if her entire reputation hadn't been undone by her own words and her own behavior. And still, somehow, she thought she could narrate her way out of it. It's almost funny in a tragic, slow car crash kind of way, watching someone double down on a fantasy when the rest of the world has already read the receipts. But Jennifer wasn't just trying to save face. She was trying to rewrite the ending, to turn a moment of humiliation into some kind of misunderstood political fable. The problem, the public doesn't forget, and the internet definitely doesn't forget. People clipped the courtroom video into reaction memes, dubbed her quotes over viral TikToks, even made parody voiceovers like it was an SNL sketch. One TikTok had over 6 million views. It cut her threats with Judge Caprio's stone-cold stare and the caption, "When you try to use nepotism but forget the judge has Constitution unlocked." And every time she tried to make a quiet comeback, whether it was showing up at a community gala or getting involved in some obscure local nonprofit, those clips would resurface. People would tag the organization and ask, "Is this who you want representing your cause?" The reputation damage wasn't just deep, it was permanent.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Because this wasn't the kind of scandal that gets spun away with a PR team and a new headshot. It was a very public moment of who she really was when she thought the rules didn't apply to her, and that doesn't just get forgotten. Meanwhile, Judge Caprio became more iconic than ever. He didn't need a book deal or a viral speech. Just his calm, composed demeanor, his clear moral compass, and the truth broadcast in front of the entire country. That courtroom clip is now shown in law schools as a textbook case of judicial restraint, professionalism, and ethical authority. There's something incredibly satisfying about how poetic the fallout was. Jennifer Sullivan tried to use her husband's political power to avoid a few parking fines. Instead, she cost him his career, ignited a statewide ethics investigation, triggered new government transparency measures, and became a cautionary tale studied in classrooms. All for a few parking tickets. That's the part that never stops being wild. This wasn't about some multi-million-dollar scandal. It wasn't corporate fraud or election tampering. It was parking tickets. Petty, boring, everyday infractions. And it still managed to blow up 2 careers, fracture a reputation, and expose how easily power can twist into entitlement. It's almost Shakespearean, except Shakespeare would have dialed it back for being too on the nose. The power couple, the hubris, the public downfall, the voice of reason in the form of an unshakable judge. It's got everything: drama, irony, downfall, and a moral so loud you don't even need narration. And that moral, it's not complicated. No one is above the law. Not because it sounds good on a poster, but because the moment we start letting people flex their connections to override fairness, we lose the very thing democracy stands on: trust. And Judge Caprio knew that. He didn't just protect the dignity of his courtroom, he reminded everyone watching that consequences still exist, that your last name, your connections, and your status don't mean anything when you're standing before the law, only your actions do. So as the dust settles and Jennifer Sullivan fades into the distant echo of political disaster history, one thing remains clear. You can't intimidate your way out of responsibility. Not anymore. Not with cameras rolling, not with people paying attention, and especially not in front of a judge who's built his entire career on fairness, compassion, and refusing to be pushed around. And if you ever find yourself tempted to drop someone's title in the hopes of skipping a consequence, remember what happened in that courtroom. A woman tried to bend the law and instead got bent over by it. If this story had you yelling yes at your screen, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for more celebrity crashes and courtroom chaos, and drop a comment with your favorite part of the meltdown. Did Judge Caprio earn a medal for keeping his cool, or should we name a courthouse after him already? Either way, next time you're at a meter, maybe just put a quarter in.